Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. September the 2nd, 2022. Memphis, Tennessee. At 4:26 a.m., a surveillance camera stationed near Central Avenue captured a lone figure moving steadily down the street. Her gait was familiar, focused. She was wearing a bright pink top and purple shorts. This was a routine. This was discipline. This was Eliza Fletcher, wife, mother of two, kindergarten teacher, and a former collegiate athlete who ran the same route each morning before the city even blinked awake. At 7:45 a.m., she hadn't returned home. Her husband called police. The first responding officer reached the scene near the University of Memphis by 8:10 a.m. Her phone had already been located on the sidewalk by a biker, along with a single Champion brand sandal. Her AirPods were still connected, but pinged from a separate location a mile away. There was no indication of struggle, no broken fence, no overturned gravel, just a clean sidewalk and two disconnected digital breadcrumbs. By 9:30 a.m., a full-scale search was activated. Multiple Memphis Police Department units canvassed the area. A K-9 team was deployed to trace scent along her running route. Meanwhile, investigators secured surrounding surveillance footage. Within hours, they isolated one video frame that would pivot the case. It showed a black 2013 GMC Terrain idling near the curb at 4:29 a.m. A figure steps out. The struggle lasts less than 10 seconds. Eliza is pulled into the passenger side. The SUV waits for 4 more minutes before leaving the scene. This wasn't an accident. It was a precise and deliberate abduction. The FBI was notified by 1:15 p.m. As pressure mounted, law enforcement knew that time was the single most critical factor. A missing adult in the first 24 hours, especially one taken by force, is categorized as a code red in national protocol. FBI Forensics Operations Unit from Quantico advised MPD to prioritize 3 parallel streams: trace evidence collection at the abduction site, cell site triangulation of her last known coordinates, full VIN trace on the suspected vehicle. Meanwhile, family members, friends, and co-workers gathered at the Fletcher residence. None had seen or heard from Eliza since she left the house at 4:09 a.m. That morning, she'd placed her phone on Do Not Disturb, standard for her morning runs. Her Apple Watch had not recorded a completed run. Her usual 5-mile loop had been interrupted within minutes of starting. By sunset, public interest had reached national scale. The name Eliza Fletcher trended online. Helicopters hovered over the wooded corridors surrounding East Memphis. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search effort. Inside the mobile command unit, lead investigator LaTanya Jackson reviewed the timeline on a large LCD board. One sentence stood out in her notes: "No forensic noise. Clean swipe." That's a problem. This wasn't messy. It was too clean. No blood spatter. No torn clothing. No scream reported. Either the act was so fast no one could react, or it was someone practiced in silence. At 6:12 p.m., the department received a report. A second surveillance angle from a commercial building 5 blocks down had captured the same SUV turning into a neighborhood street less than 10 minutes after the abduction. The timestamp was 4:45 a.m. The direction indicated a westbound escape, possibly toward Victor Street, a known area with abandoned structures and low foot traffic. By 10:37 p.m., investigators were on site near the intersection of Victor and S. Orleans. Nothing visible, but a sweep of local registration databases matched one black GMC Terrain to a residence 2 blocks from that area. The vehicle was registered under a female name. A cross-check revealed a male resident with a prior record, recently released from prison, but no move was made. They needed physical linkage, not assumptions, not proximity. At the end of that first day, Eliza's status was reclassified: missing, presumed abducted. A statewide BOLO was issued for the GMC Terrain. Federal teams remained on standby. Memphis wasn't asleep anymore. The next 24 hours would either expose the cracks in the system or open a wound no one in the community would forget. At 6:52 a.m. on September 3rd, less than 27 hours after Eliza Fletcher disappeared, a new set of surveillance footage was logged by the Memphis Police Department. The source, a fixed-angle camera on a commercial storefront along Cummings Street, roughly 1.5 miles west of the abduction point. The timestamp read 4:45 a.m., just 16 minutes after she was last seen being forced into a black SUV near Central Avenue. The vehicle matched the description: 2013 GMC Terrain, dark tint, passenger side damage to the rear panel. But what mattered wasn't just recognition, it was direction. The vehicle was heading west, away from downtown, into South Memphis. A known cluster of under-patrolled industrial zones and boarded housing units lined the corridor. That shift in movement turned the case. At 8:14 a.m., Detective Jackson authorized geolocation subpoena requests for Eliza Fletcher's last known iPhone signal in Apple Watch telemetry. The iPhone had stopped transmitting at 5:02 a.m., but not before pinging a cell tower near Victor Street. The signal didn't move after that. It was either powered off or destroyed. The next move was the footwear. The single champion slide recovered at the crime scene was bagged and delivered to MPD's Forensic Biology Unit. Lab technician notes indicated the presence of trace epithelial cells on the heel and inner sole, inconsistent with Eliza's own profile. The sample was rushed to Tennessee's State Crime Lab. Within 14 hours, a CODIS hit was confirmed. The DNA belonged to a male subject with prior felony records, specifically aggravated kidnapping and assault. He had been released in 2020 after serving a 20-year sentence. The lead wasn't speculative, it was hard-linked. Still, the identity was redacted from internal reports pending operational review. This was about building the case brick by brick. No early confrontation, no leaks. The vehicle, however, now became the primary target. By late afternoon, DMV records confirmed only one black GMC Terrain registered within a 5-mile radius of the abduction route. The vehicle belonged to a woman residing in the 1700 block of Waterstone Lane, just 2 streets east of Victor Street, the same area where the iPhone had last pinged. Investigators conducted a visual drive-by. The car was there, parked crooked in the driveway, with a tarp half draped over the rear. One tire looked recently replaced. A hose was still connected to the side faucet. Wet pavement marked a recent rinse down. At 6:23 p.m., Detective Jackson filed a motion for property surveillance under emergency cause. A pole-mounted covert camera was installed across the street. No arrest? Not yet. Inside the vehicle's probable movement radius, officers began canvassing abandoned properties and vacant lots. The rationale was procedural. Statistically, abductions that end in homicide often involve concealment attempts within 24 to 48 hours post-event. They were up against that window. Simultaneously, digital forensics parsed geolocation metadata from Eliza's Apple Watch. Though the device had ceased active reporting shortly after 4:40 a.m., health app data revealed an abrupt heart rate spike at 4:30 a.m., then flatline. No steps registered after that time. It wasn't confirmation, but it was enough. Back at HQ, Detective Jackson paced between 2 evidence boards. One held a map, the other, a timeline with 3 names marked only by initials. None were family. All had past felony flags. She paused, stared at the synced timestamps from surveillance footage and geolocation data. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. For the public, the case was still an active missing person investigation. But internally, the department had shifted posture. The search was no longer about recovery. It was about resolution. And Memphis, quietly, had stopped calling this a disappearance. On the morning of September 4th, the Memphis Police Department executed a search warrant at a 1-story duplex on Waterstone Lane. The property had been under surveillance for 18 hours. The black GMC Terrain, seen in both surveillance clips, was parked in the driveway. Forensic specialists moved in with gloves sealed, booties on, and an evidence van positioned across the street. Every entry point was documented. Every surface, swabbed. The vehicle was the priority. Initial observations of the GMC Terrain revealed signs of rushed and incomplete cleaning. The front and rear passenger seat carpets were visibly damp, and a strong chemical odor, identified later as diluted bleach, was detected. The cargo floor mat had been removed. Traces of reddish-brown staining were noted beneath the seat brackets. Luminol testing confirmed the presence of biological material consistent with human blood. Samples were taken and logged for DNA confirmation. Investigators recovered hair strands wedged in the seam of the rear passenger door. The profile was later matched to Eliza Fletcher through mitochondrial comparison. This wasn't just about finding the car. It was now about proving what had happened inside it. Inside the home, the search was more deliberate. The kitchen floor appeared recently mopped. A bottle of industrial-strength degreaser was found beneath the sink, still open. In the bathroom, towels with discoloration resembling bloodstain patterns were located inside a covered bin. The washing machine contained dark garments still soaked from a partial cycle, interrupted mid-wash. One of the items seized was a pair of Champion slides, identical to the one found at the abduction site. Only one foot had wear marks consistent with prolonged use. It was the matching pair. Bedroom linens had been stripped. A plastic tarp folded in a corner of the closet bore scuff marks and residue. Under blacklight, trace biological evidence was detected. Fluid splatter patterns inconsistent with natural causes. It was logged and transported for analysis. The house itself had no signs of forced entry or struggle, but certain things stood out. A nightstand drawer contained a set of latex gloves still in factory packaging. A roll of black contractor bags, only one missing. A disposable phone with no recent call history, though connected to nearby cell towers matching the route taken by the SUV on the morning of the abduction. The evidence chain was now active across 3 departments: crime scene, digital forensics, and behavioral analysis. What began as a missing persons case was now being built into a homicide prosecution, even though no body had yet been recovered. Detective Jackson reviewed the inventory. She noted the use of bleach and chemical cleaners. That alone wasn't damning, but the choice of cleanup methods, combined with hair, blood, and personal property, created a pattern. It wasn't panic. It was an attempt at erasure. Back at the lab, the blood recovered from beneath the SUV's carpet tested positive as human female. Further analysis confirmed a match to Eliza Fletcher. The case was entering a new phase. Later that evening, under a separate search warrant, officers scouted a secondary location, a vacant duplex on Orleans Avenue. Based on traffic camera review and neighborhood surveillance, the suspect vehicle had been spotted circling the block in that area less than 30 minutes after the abduction. No official entry was made that day, but the site was flagged for excavation and cadaver dog sweep within 48 hours. As evidence mounted, the weight of it wasn't just legal, it was cultural. Memphis, a city with its share of violent crime, was now witnessing the dismantling of a case that began with a jog and led to forensic dissection inside a suburban home. In small towns and quiet streets, violence doesn't echo, it lingers. And every uncovered hair, every missed swipe of bleach, was telling a story that someone hoped no one would ever hear. At 5:07 p.m. on September 5th, a K-9 unit assigned to Sector 3, operating under a secondary search grid, alerted near the rear of an abandoned duplex on Victor Street, approximately 160 yards from the suspect's residence. The alert was sustained. The dog had fixated on a specific patch of overgrown grass between the foundation and a rusted HVAC unit. Officers flagged the location, secured the perimeter, and requested crime scene and medical examiner personnel on standby. The search grid had been based on the last confirmed vehicle movement and cell tower data from the victim's iPhone. Earlier aerial sweeps hadn't picked up anomalies, but ground-level scent tracking provided what satellite imaging missed. The terrain was uneven and cluttered with debris, broken bricks, discarded insulation, and scattered refuse. Officers found a blue plastic trash bag partially buried beneath a thin layer of wet leaves. Near it, shoe prints consistent with a men's-size 10.5 athletic shoe. The bag contained torn athletic wear, later identified as Eliza Fletcher's running shorts and sports bra. Both were heavily soiled with dirt and biological fluid. 15 feet away, concealed beneath a deteriorated wood pallet, they found the body. The remains were clothed in the same pink running top Eliza was last seen wearing. The lower torso was partially exposed. Decomposition had begun. There were visible injuries to the face and head, along with signs of blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. The position of the body, side-lying, knees slightly bent, suggested manual placement rather than natural collapse. The area was immediately secured as a homicide scene. Dr. Karen Forrest, Shelby County Chief Medical Examiner, conducted a field assessment before transferring the remains. Environmental indicators, temperature, insect activity, fluid seepage, suggested time of death was consistent with the morning of September 2nd, less than 2 hours after the abduction. There were no ligature marks, no signs of defensive wounds on the arms or hands, no visible gunshot wounds. Transport of the remains was completed by 6:38 p.m. Evidence markers were placed across a 20-yard radius. Trace fibers from synthetic tarp were found near the body's feet, matching those recovered from the closet of the Waterstone Lane property. A field technician also recovered a black plastic handle partially embedded in the soil near the HVAC unit. The item was consistent with a short-handled utility tool, possibly a window scraper. It had red transfer marks resembling blood. Preliminary testing indicated a positive presumptive for human blood. DNA swabs, trace liftings, and soil samples were logged, bagged, and submitted by 8:20 p.m. Back at the ME's office, the autopsy was scheduled for the following morning. Eliza Fletcher's body was officially identified via dental records. Toxicology samples were preserved. Full-body X-rays revealed 2 linear fractures along the left orbital rim and a depressed skull fracture along the occipital bone. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. Manner of death, homicide. Law enforcement made the notification to the Fletcher family shortly after 10 p.m. That moment, while standard in protocol, underscored the reason cases like these demand urgency. When time is lost, so is life. In the days that followed, Memphis city officials addressed the public. The case had escalated quickly, not because of speculation, but because of the evidence, and the way that evidence was preserved, traced, and confirmed. For investigators, the discovery of Eliza Fletcher's body closed one operational chapter, but it also opened another, proving premeditation, intent, and forensic continuity from point of abduction to site of disposal. Every step now had to hold in court, and it started in the grass behind an abandoned house, just 3 blocks from where she was taken. By the morning of September 6th, the Memphis Police Department's Digital Evidence Unit was no longer working in parallel to the main investigation. It was driving it. The recovery of Eliza Fletcher's body had clarified the nature of the crime. Now the goal was to backfill the timeline, isolate intent, and expose every movement made by the suspect in the 24-hour window between abduction and arrest. What physical evidence confirmed, digital forensics would corroborate. The process began with a seized mobile device recovered from the bedroom at the Waterstone Lane residence, a prepaid, no-contract model with limited activity. It had no social apps, no stored contacts, and only one recent outgoing call. A number associated with a local tow service, time stamped at 2:18 p.m. on September 2nd. Investigators flagged the call, but it was the device's metadata, specifically its GPS and Wi-Fi history, that opened new angles. The phone had connected to 3 different public Wi-Fi points between 4:01 a.m. and 6:00 a.m. on the morning of the abduction. 2 were located near the abduction site. The third, just 2 blocks from the duplex where Eliza's body was found. Though the device was wiped manually before seizure, system logs remained. Digital forensics recovered geolocation strings, confirming movement consistent with the GM Cedar Rain's known path. At the same time, analysts worked on obtaining Google location history linked to the suspect's primary Gmail account, which had been passively active on a second phone, a personal device left at a relative's home. The data showed 2 key things: presence at the scene of the abduction at 4:30 a.m. and a stopover on Victor Street less than 30 minutes later. It also showed stationary activity near an abandoned commercial warehouse at 6:02 a.m., consistent with the time needed to dispose of physical evidence. Separately, investigators pulled footage from a local Marathon gas station. Security cameras there captured the black SUV circling the lot at 6:24 a.m., pausing at the rear garbage area before exiting without purchase. No facial capture, no transaction trail. But the license plate, blurred but legible, matched. The vehicle had tried to vanish in plain sight. The data had not. In court, digital logs like these often hold more weight than witness testimony. They don't forget. They don't lie. But raw data alone isn't enough. It needed context. It needed to answer the question, was this an act of opportunity or intent? Detective Jackson requested a behavioral analysis review of digital patterns in the days leading up to September 2nd. What they found wasn't a clear search history. There were no typed queries for how to get rid of evidence or how to avoid DNA detection. But there was an anomaly. On August 30th, the prepaid device had connected to a traffic camera control node through unsecured Wi-Fi, directly across from Eliza's running route. That interaction lasted less than 3 minutes but was long enough to ping its geolocation. It was the first sign of premeditation. Alongside this, forensic analysts retrieved location history from the vehicle's infotainment system. The last 3 routes logged on the in-dash navigation interface included one point repeated multiple times: 1707 Victor Street. That's where the body had been found. In cases like this, digital trails don't just support prosecution, they remove ambiguity. Each timestamp became a brick in the narrative. Each ping, each stop, each deleted app, evidence of movement with consequence. At 2:41 p.m., the FBI issued a digital behavior profile confirming likelihood of pre-offense planning. Combined with physical evidence and forensic linkage, the case no longer revolved around circumstantial suggestion. It had become a documented sequence, and behind every byte of data was the weight of one reality. Someone had mapped out a route, followed it with precision, and believed no one would ever retrace their steps. But they did. By September 6th at 10:12 a.m., the Memphis Police Department issued a formal arrest warrant based on consolidated evidence. Forensic linkage to Eliza Fletcher's recovered body, DNA from the vehicle, digital trail confirmation, and witness proximal activity. The suspect, previously under covert surveillance, was taken into custody without incident in a controlled stop outside a convenience store near Airways Boulevard. He was unarmed. His vehicle was impounded again. The arrest wasn't impulsive, it was timed. Digital forensics had just confirmed the most recent batch of location data less than an hour earlier. The sequence of movement, abduction site, route deviation, and return pattern had solidified the probable cause. The goal now shifted to controlled extraction of testimony without violating procedural integrity. At the precinct, the suspect was read his rights and held in isolation. His recorded behavior was erratic, sometimes calm, sometimes reactive. He requested legal counsel within the first hour, limiting interrogation opportunities. No verbal confession was obtained in the initial session, but this didn't delay the case. Investigators weren't depending on a confession. They already had the proof. Still, a psychological profile was initiated. The Behavioral Analysis Unit from Quantico provided remote consultation. The profile matched a high-control, high-denial personality with prior experience in abduction and suppression tactics. Notably, this suspect had previously served a 2-decade sentence for kidnapping, released in 2020. That past conviction had followed a similar pattern: forced entry, physical control, and concealment of movement. The difference this time was fatal outcome and forensic preparedness, or the lack of it. Inside the evidence review room, the prosecutor's office began staging the charging structure. The strategy was layered: first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and unlawful disposal of a body. Each charge was built to stand independently in case plea negotiation arose later. But the lead prosecutor made it clear this wasn't a plea-driven case. The defense's position leaned on lack of direct confession and potential third-party contamination. But this was countered almost immediately. The champion slide recovered at the abduction site had the suspect's DNA. The tarp found in the closet matched the material beneath the victim's remains. The GPS logs, triangulated from 2 separate phones, aligned with time-stamped surveillance. There was no break in the chain. The autopsy report had been finalized earlier that morning. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. Manner: homicide. The ME's office confirmed the injury pattern was consistent with object impact, likely a handheld tool. Combined with field evidence, a black utility scraper retrieved near the disposal site, the correlation became prosecutable. During booking, the suspect refused to answer additional questions. His demeanor remained static. No documented remorse, no acknowledgement of the victim. From a procedural standpoint, this wasn't unusual. From a moral one, it was stark. In the post-arrest conference, Detective Jackson noted one detail that stood out, not for its drama, but for its weight. The suspect had driven past the site of abduction 2 more times in the hours after Eliza Fletcher's disappearance. No functional purpose, no alibi, just a loop. It was that loop, recorded through traffic cameras and confirmed by GPS, that erased any doubt about intent. When violent crime is premeditated, the evidence isn't always in the act. It's in the repetition, the return, the lack of deviation. That's where pattern becomes motive. And in a case like this, the motive doesn't need to be explained to be proven. By September 7th, the suspect in Eliza Fletcher's abduction and murder was in custody. The forensic evidence was cataloged, and the charging process had begun. But in the days that followed, the story didn't just remain in the courtroom, it ignited across Tennessee and beyond. Not because of what had happened to Eliza, but because of what had been missed before it ever did. As investigators finalized the sequence of the crime, a disturbing threat emerged. Back in 2021, a separate sexual assault report had been filed with Memphis PD. The victim, a woman who survived, submitted to a full sexual assault forensic exam. Her attacker had not been identified at the time, but a complete rape kit was collected and submitted to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The kit sat untested for over a year. After the arrest in the Fletcher case, DNA recovered from her sandal was run through CODIS, the National Combined DNA Index System. That same DNA profile matched the one found in the 2021 assault kit. The link was clear. If that earlier sample had been processed in time, the man who abducted and killed Eliza Fletcher could have already been in custody. But the backlog was real and it was fatal. State officials were quick to acknowledge the failure, but families and advocates were quicker. The public now saw the gap not as a clerical delay, but as a collapse in protection. The case exposed how evidence existed, had been preserved, and yet hadn't been acted on. The victim from the prior case spoke out through her attorney. "I followed every step I was supposed to. The system didn't." Memphis police and the TBI had no meaningful justification beyond capacity. Tennessee, like most states, had a backlog of untested rape kits numbering in the thousands. The reasons were bureaucratic: processing delays, lab understaffing, resource prioritization. But none of them changed the result. A woman had been killed by a man whose DNA sat in storage. In response, a policy task force was initiated within 2 weeks. The focus wasn't only on clearing existing rape kits, but on mandating turnaround thresholds and accountability for every untested sample. Several states adopted similar reviews. Inside the courtroom, none of this changed the facts. But outside it, the case became a catalyst. Eliza's family did not seek the spotlight, but the tragedy gave voice to a systemic failure many survivors had already known. It wasn't just about one criminal act. It was about the institutional lag that let it happen. For investigators like Jackson, who had followed procedure from the first hour of the disappearance, the revelation cut deeper than any one piece of evidence. They had worked fast, clean, and by the book. But someone else had done their job too late, and it had cost everything. In true crime, timelines are everything. And sometimes the most dangerous lapse isn't in seconds or hours. It's the year someone thought they had to wait. The trial opened in October 2024 at the Shelby County Criminal Justice Center. The courtroom was sealed for high-profile security, and press access was restricted to pre-approved outlets. The defendant entered under armed escort, wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit. He showed no emotion. There were no cameras allowed, no public statement from the family. But the weight of the evidence did not require spectacle. The prosecution's strategy was built on precision. They led not with the trauma of the case, but with the structure, showing a sequence that could not have occurred by chance. Eliza Fletcher was taken at 4:29 a.m. The suspect's DNA was on her recovered sandal. The same SUV caught on security footage was registered at the address where biological trace evidence matched the victim. The tarp used to wrap her body carried identical fiber composition to the one found folded in the suspect's bedroom closet. The prosecutor did not use emotional appeal. Instead, he opened with a phrase that underscored the entire case. Every step he took, she never returned from. Digital forensics was key. Jurors were shown time-stamped GPS movement logs, showing the vehicle stopping at the dump site before returning home. The Apple Watch health data showed a sudden spike in heart rate, then silence. The phone's last ping confirmed geographic overlap. There was no ambiguity, there was only sequence. The defense argued lack of confession and attempted to undermine the chain of custody. But cross-examination confirmed every item had been logged, sealed, and tested within federal forensic standards. Chain of evidence reports were complete. There was no missing link, no loophole. The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. The sentence was delivered the following week. Life without the possibility of parole. There were no appeals filed within the statutory window. No statements from the defendant. No interviews. He would remain incarcerated at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, permanently. Eliza's family declined televised interviews. They issued a written statement. "We are grateful for the truth. We are still living with the cost." But what followed reached beyond this single case. 2 weeks after the trial, the Tennessee state legislature introduced a bipartisan bill mandating that all sexual assault kits be tested within 60 days of collection. It passed unanimously. Federal funding followed. The backlog that had allowed this man's DNA to sit untouched in a 2021 rape kit was finally being addressed. Other states, Georgia, Arkansas, Missouri, began audits of their forensic backlogs as well. Community response was equally urgent. Local runners organized an annual event, Finish Liza's Run, to raise awareness for women's safety and advocate for systemic accountability. Over 2,000 participants joined the inaugural run, including law enforcement, educators, and victims' rights groups. The event was not symbolic, it was strategic. Proceeds funded a legal aid initiative for untested assault survivors. Within MPD, internal audit procedures were revised. The Digital Evidence Unit received new staffing and a rotating backlog review task force. The Memphis Forensic Biology Lab secured expanded funding from the Department of Justice, reducing its processing time by 48% within 6 months. There is no correction that undoes a crime like this. But some systems learn late, others refuse to. The value of Eliza's case, if it can be said to have one, is that it moved the first group forward fast. In narrative crime, resolution is often equated with punishment, but punishment is not the same as prevention. Justice, at its best, is a consequence that teaches, not just an outcome that ends. As for Eliza Fletcher, she remains the victim of a crime that should not have happened. Her name is now attached to a legal reform, a memorial run, and a data-driven restructuring of forensic practice. These are not gestures. They are infrastructure, and that's what remains. Before we close, I want to say this, not as a storyteller, but as someone who's watched this case unfold from every forensic file, every court transcript, every silence in the record. Stories like Eliza Fletcher's aren't just tragedies, they're warnings. They remind us that justice delayed isn't just justice denied. It can cost lives. And while justice may have arrived too late for her, what we do next still matters. Maybe you've walked a quiet street in the early morning. Maybe someone you love does every day. So tell me, what should change? What systems failed her, and how do we fix them? If this video spoke to you, drop a comment below. Tell me what part stayed with you, or just let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, that's okay too. Share your thoughts. I read them all. If you found value in this story, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. We don't just tell stories, we uncover what they leave behind.